as long as sports have been played outdoors, the weather has been affecting them.
We're going to take a closer look at how the weather affects certain sports such as baseball and football, and we'll delve into some famous examples where it really has changed the outcome of some games. You're watching the Cold Front here on VUTV. Welcome to the Cold Front. I'm Dave Caulfield. Rachel is off tonight.
And I'm Matthew Schaefer. And when it comes to sports and weather, there are a lot of parameters that actually affect it. It's not just the wind, which is kind of the obvious one. You know, it can push the ball around to make it go longer or shorter. But there's a lot more to it. Temperature will affect things, humidity, and so much, much more. And we're going to dive all into that on this episode of the Cold Front. Let's start with the obvious one, wind. And let's start with the sport baseball because it tends to have a little bit more of an impact on baseball.
Right.
And maybe that's because baseball is played on a 90-degree playing field where the ball can go in much more directions, so much more likely that it's affected by the wind. But when a ball is hit, and let's say, for example, it's going to be flying 400 feet on a calm day, which is about a wall scraper depending on the individual ballpark.
Right.
If there is a 15-mile-per-hour wind heading straight out in the direction of the ball's hit, and that's not that abnormal of a wind condition.
Right, it's very normal, especially in a stadium-like setting.
Exactly. So that ball can be affected up to 40 feet and become 440 feet. That's the difference from bouncing off the front of the wall at the average center field to being a monster home run. And on the opposite side of that, if the wind's blowing in, like the flags above my head at Wrigley Field are in the picture up there, that will affect it 40 feet the other way. And 360 feet, the center field is pretty much right where the center fielder stands and doesn't even have to move for an easy out.
Absolutely, and especially at my favorite team, the Mets' home stadium, Citi Field, that could be the difference between a long double and a home run. And to give you a sense, a couple of famous baseball stadiums, Yankee Stadium, obviously one of the most famous, now the new Yankee Stadium, and Coors Field, the home of the Colorado Rockies. So just to give you a sense, Yankee Stadium about sea level, you know, compared to Coors Field, and a home run there will actually, you get 40 more feet once you move to Coors Field because of the change in altitude. Now, you could argue, of course, that there has been the whole conspiracy at Yankee Stadium about a wind tunnel in right field and helping them get a lot more home runs, but we won't delve into that there. But it's an interesting story.
Well, I think we should dive
okay,
into that a
you know
bit.
what, we will.
And a lot of times, and I want to do this a little bit because Yankee Stadium, the new Yankee Stadium when built, it was kind of built to mirror the original Yankee Stadium dimensions, which had an absurdly short right field dimensions.
Right.
So the new Yankee Stadium was also built with shorter right field dimensions than the average. And a lot of that was based on some of their players being lefties, and they wanted to make it easier for them to hit home runs. And teams will do that. They'll look at the weather and wind patterns and trying to build stadiums to help their players. And like you said, in Colorado, up in Denver, and we'll deal with this a little bit later when we talk about the pressure, but that stadium actually has the second most outfield area of any ballpark, and yet still gives up some of the most home runs to it. And that's due to the pressure and the thinner air up there. We'll get into that. But Yankee Stadium, so short in right field, and given the orientation of the stadium where the prevailing winds are out of a lot of the times, that helps push that ball way out to right field.
Yeah, exactly. And the stadium itself is not very deep in most points, but especially right field. I believe it was 318 in the old stadium. It's pretty close to that now. But the difference is, again, what Matt said, the prevailing winds. The old stadium was oriented a different direction, and they changed it. They moved it pretty much across the street in the Bronx. So pretty much the same location. But those winds, if they get cranking at the right time, a ball that would be maybe a pop-up in some instances will actually go out of the ballpark. So they're lefties such as Teixeira, Granderson, and some other lefties that play there, they'll actually have a lot more home runs at home as opposed to some righties such as Jeter, who doesn't hit many home runs, but that's okay. One of the best shortstops there is, and Rodriguez when he's actually playing well. If they try to go opposite field, they'll have a better time hitting it out than maybe going to their prevailing left field.
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about wind when it's in the exact direction of the flight, but what happens when the wind's not that way? It's very rare to hit it perfectly into the flow. A lot of times you either have a slight cross or a complete 90-degree crosswind. Well, I'm sure you've seen it, and you might see it a little bit more in football as your favorite team's trying to kick their winning field goal, and the kick goes up towards the uprights. It looks straight, and suddenly straight sideways, and it hooks at the end where the wind's really affecting it, and it'll tail and you'll miss. That's all it takes, 40 yards on a football field, and the wind, even just a little bit on a crosswind, can push it from being good to no good. And similarly in baseball, is that you're hitting a home run towards the line, well, wind's blowing away towards the foul pole, you might push it foul. So not necessarily the speed, but also the direction that it's blowing in is very important.
Yeah, especially for the outfielders. Matt was saying that in Coors Field, you have so much less room actually to play because the ball travels a lot farther. Now, if you have a wind that is helping you as a hitter, it will obviously carry the ball a lot better. Now, as a fielder, we haven't really delved into this possibility. As a fielder, you have to know the wind, and that's why they have the flagpoles at all times, because that ball can look from an outfielder's perspective, because I did play outfield for a while. You can't really decide where the ball is until a couple of seconds up. Then you have to rely on the fielders in the infield to see, is it back, is it up, where do you have to go? But the wind, especially really close to the point of catching the ball, once it starts its descent, it could really affect where it goes. So wind direction and speed, but more direction is very important in the game of baseball. Now, we'll go back to football for a little bit. And some of the most famous endings to games where, you hear wide right and wide left, and usually they're not by much, and that's what's so heartbreaking for fans. I mean, there are the occasional ones that are just out of the stratosphere left or right. But those close field goals, they could really be affected by winds, not pretty late in the flight, so to speak, of the football.
Well, that's just because as the football is in flight, the wind's pushing on it the whole time. There's having that force, but the longer it's pushing on it, so later in its trajectory, the more it's affecting it. It's more of a curve, and that's why you get that late end where it looks like it's on a straight line, then it just starts at the last minute, it tails. So that's a little bit about that. And I think we should change courses a little bit. The wind is the obvious one. Well, what about things like just temperature? Normally, for baseball especially, a long season, especially here up in the north, you can have the summer 90s and the winter, or in the spring and fall months, into the 30s on the extremes. And even throughout the United States, on a given day, it could be, 45 degrees up in Minneapolis where the Twins play, and then down in Texas, it could be 100. And the difference between 95 degrees and 45 degrees is about 20 feet with the ball traveling further when it's warmer.
Yeah, and when it's colder, part of it is as a hitter, especially with the wooden bats, because you don't use wood as far as the type of bat until you get up a little bit in the levels. But it's so hard to when you make contact to have a full grip of the bat when it's cold, because the force of the ball hitting the bat, you can feel it so much more when it's cold, just because of what we'll talk about later, the density of the air. More dense means it's colder outside as far as temperature. So that can play a role as well. And simply because when you hit it, the ball will travel farther in warm air, because that cold air, again, acts as kind of a more
it's more
tight,
dense. The molecules are more packed together, and that's more for the ball to push through. It creates more of a drag, and it slows it down.
Right. Picture it like trying to move through water as opposed to try and move through ice, if that's possible to move through ice. But moving through the water, depending on how dense that water field, more like ice, it's much more difficult to move through that surface if it's more dense.
Exactly. So, and 20 feet again. That's the difference between a home run in some cases and an out. Or maybe a single and caught by a fielder, so that ball's able to go more. And that's obviously the extreme side of it, but 20 feet is certainly not something that we can't ignore.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go and take a quick break. You're watching the Cold Front on VUTV.
Lollipop, lollipop, oh
We say what we want Thursday nights at 7 p.m. only on VUTV.
Hi everybody, I'm Dick Vitale of ESPN, and I'm on VUTV. It's awesome, baby, with a capital A.
And welcome back to the Cold Front, talking all about sports and weather, two of my favorite things personally. We kind of teased ahead at Denver, Colorado, and what makes it so special.
Mm-hmm.
Denver, Colorado, we're the home of the Colorado Rockies for baseball and the Denver Broncos for football play, is obviously up in the Rocky Mountains.
The Mile High City, as it's so called.
In fact, Mile High Stadium for the Broncos. But that's because it's 5,000 feet above sea level. And what that really means is the pressure at the surface is so much less than normal, which means there's less air and weight of the air pushing down on you, making that air really, really thin. And that thin air can cause balls to fly a long distance. You can make long field goals for the Broncos.
Mm-hmm.
You can have home runs. And Colorado Rockies, they have an absolutely huge outfield. And that's one thing I love about baseball is the variable fence lengths at different stadiums. It's a different
It's
place.
never the same.
But in Colorado, with the second biggest outfield in the major leagues, has some of the most home runs, and usually with an outfield that big, it's a pitcher ballpark, and the fielders just run down track everything. But something with the fielders is because of the thinner air and it's harder on their bodies, outfielders lose about 9 feet in their range, and infielders lose about a foot in Colorado. So it makes it hard for the outfielders to get there. You get a lot of extra base hits too. Balls that go to the gap travel all the way to that wall, and that's a long throwback to the infield. So a lot of factors over in Colorado.
Yeah, absolutely. And what they've tried to do to combat that is they've installed basically a giant dehumidifier in Coors Field. And while it does take away some of these effects, most of them are still there. So you will get games where, just everybody tearing the cover off of the ball. Maybe they're a high offensive team. You'll just get home runs up the wazoo. And another thing involved with that is pitching in Denver.
Yeah, we just talked about hitting so far today.
Yeah.
But pitching,
Pitching is very important.
even though it's a shorter distance for the field, big effects too with the weather.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, fastballs actually travel faster because, again, of the density in air. But here's the thing that may upset some pitchers having aspirations for playing for the Rockies. Curveballs have less break. So what happens when the curveball breaks in, and sometimes just over the top, but sometimes it's more of a 45-degree angle that it comes in. Now, if it doesn't break as much and you're a hitter, you're just up there.
It's a slow T-ball pitch.
Yeah, basically. And you just see it not breaking, and you're like, all right, breakfast, lunch, and dinner all over it. And so it's a kind of a give and take, double-edged sword scenario there for the pitchers. And they have to combat that by throwing not as many junk pitches, as we call it, and sticking more to the heaters.
And the ownership knows this. I mean, anyone who thinks that the owners and general managers are ignorant of the weather and how their stadium plays, you're not thinking straight.
Mm-hmm.
These GMs, they know this stuff. And Colorado will look for pitchers that are more powering with their location and speed of their pitches. If you're a specialist pitcher, the Colorado Rockies probably don't want you because you're probably not going to do as good in Colorado as you will in any other city. So that type of stuff has a big deal. And we talked about the break on the curveball. They're saying with Roger Clemens, his curveball would lose 3 inches of break when he went to Coors Field in Colorado.
That's amazing.
That's a big difference when it comes to pitching.
The difference between a strikeout and a grand slam up in the third deck there. That's amazing. And another pitch that has really captivated the baseball world over the past, I'd say, 5 to 10 years, at least.
Yeah, it's been making a comeback.
Is the knuckleball. And now my favorite pitch, I wish I knew how to throw it. I've actually tried to learn
Dave,
it.
if you could throw one, you probably wouldn't be standing here next to you.
I would be in the major leagues because it's such a defining pitch and a pitch that fools pretty much everybody, regardless of how good.
Sometimes it fools the pitcher on which way it goes.
Exactly.
So the pitcher doesn't really know
fools
all
the
time.
catcher, fools the pitcher, fools the cameraman, the umpire, everybody.
The umpires don't like it.
Yeah, the umpires don't like it at all. But here's the thing with the knuckleball. You know, R.A. Dickey is still a Cy Young candidate. They haven't announced that yet, but still, 20-win season. He's one of the most famous knuckleballers of today, of the year, and his knuckleball is directly impacted by the weather, and it's interesting. In the early season games, air density, or in all games, air density matters so much with the knuckleball. Now, it's usually more dense, as we talked about, in colder weather, and because of that, the knuckleball doesn't have as much spin. And you're probably thinking, Matt, well, wait, Dave. Yes, Matt. Isn't it important to have spin on pitches such as a fastball? Yes, it is important on a fastball, but with a knuckleball, you want as little spin as possible. So
that really is what the knuckleball
is.
Because it's a little spin.
You probably want about a half of a rotation of the ball so it could flutter, as it's called, side to side, maybe a bit of a corkscrew motion, and try to get in for the strike and totally fool the batter.
If you've ever tried to throw a football at home without putting spin on it, you know, it's in flight, it's very unstable. You can't get to where you want to go. You probably can't throw far. Same with baseball. The spin is what adds stability to the ball, which in most cases you want because you want to control it. But the knuckleball, the theory is, you don't put spin on it and it becomes so unpredictable the hitters just cannot see the ball and can't predict where it's going to be and can't hit it.
Right, and it's hard to throw the knuckleball, but you just have to pick a certain range where you want it to go. And if it's a cold day or the atmosphere there is less dense, that could really help with the flutter or the the movement of the knuckleball. Now, the thing that people need to keep in mind here, it's a common misconception. When it is humid out, that really kills any knuckleballer's chances of doing well in the game because humidity takes away from the density in the atmosphere. So if it's a really humid day, say you're playing the Braves, the Mets are playing the Braves, and it's late July, early August, they're just terrible weather. I've been down there myself. It really takes away from the power that a pitcher like R.A. Dickey would have. And so in those cases, he really has to have his best stuff to exceed in that game.
Yeah, he started out, kind of was a failed pitcher down in the South. Well, where it's warmer, the density plays a factor. Maybe he couldn't pitch as well down there than he could up in New York.
That is a theory too, and he was a regular pitcher to start out. Not to give like a whole episode to R.A. Dickey here, but he's a fascinating individual. Failed pitcher to start out just throwing regular stuff and was about to retire.
He just couldn't make it with throwing normal pitches.
Right.
It wasn't that great.
About to retire, and he finds the knuckleball, gets taught it by another famous knuckleball. It was either, I think it was Phil Niekro, or maybe, yeah, I think it was Phil Niekro. But, sorry if that's wrong. But he got the hang of it, was traded to a couple of teams, and came up with the Mets last year, the middle of last year, and this year really came on as a 20-game winner and someone whose stuff just fooled everybody. Now, another thing with the knuckleball that I want to address here. There is some argument that the wind, actually, the direction and speed will play a factor in a knuckleballer's game because the argument is that the more wind you have, the more unpredictable it will be because the ball just flutters. So if it's fluttering, maybe the wind will pick it up and go that way. Now, that argument hasn't been proven because there's just so many variations in the wind. The wind is about as unpredictable as really a lot of things.
Especially in a stadium where it'll swirl with the stands.
Right.
And it won't be the same as it's just going straight through an
Absolutely. I couldn't believe it the first time I was in the old Giant Stadium when I was in there, just to see, like, outside it would be about 5-mile-per-hour winds, and in there they would get up to 25 to 30 miles per hour just seemingly out of nowhere. But in the case of the knuckleball, the air density is much more important to the success of the pitcher on that particular night.
Yeah, so I mean that density really plays an important thing with the knuckleball, and that's just one pitch that's nasty. And another reason why it's nasty is not many people can throw it, so batters don't face it that often. And a famous catcher, which more famous broadcaster right now, Bob Uecker, was once a catcher who caught knuckleballs. He has the best theory to catch a knuckleball, in my opinion. And Bob Uecker said, the best way to catch a knuckleball is to wait for it to stop rolling and then pick it up. And that was near the end of Bob Uecker's career, and he's become much better broadcaster than he was on the playing field. But it's such a difficult pitch to hit and everything. And I guess we're going to wrap up knuckleballs here and a little bit of sports. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to go into a little bit of case studies for where weather has really played a big role in affecting the games. You're watching the Cold Front on VUTV.
The average text takes your eyes off the road for nearly 5 seconds.
And welcome back to the Cold Front, talking all about sports and weather. We've went, in my opinion, a little too much on the physics and not really much on the impact. So let's look at a couple of major cases. I know the last time when myself and Sean Bailey did a sports and weather episode, we talked a lot about record cold, record warm games. Well, let's mention one, and I guess I might be a little biased mentioning the Green Bay Packers as a big Packer fan, and I know in Bears country that might not be the best thing for me to do, but this one is significant. Packers fans are one of the best group of fans in terms of attendance and being there.
Absolutely.
Even traveling. But back in 1985 on December 1st, this is the Snow Bowl, and this was a heavy, wet snow. In fact, about a foot of snow had fallen before the start of the game, and another 4 to 5 inches during the game. Now, the typical football game lasts about 3 hours, and 4 to 5 inches per hour.
It's over an inch an hour
That's over
rate.
1 inch of snow per hour, and that is a lot. And it's heavy, wet snow. Players said they couldn't see more than 15 yards downfield. The attendance on that game was 19,000, and pretty much that's the record low for the Packers ever. And since, you know, they had a big stadium, and the record is more of the fact that 36,000 ticket holders did not show up to the game. That was the record there.
Wow.
So
that's unbelievable. 36,000
Packer fans either couldn't make it to the game or didn't want to bear it out. It was probably more they couldn't make it there. I know I had family friends that were going to go to the game and turned around halfway there. So they had tickets to that game, but unfortunately were unable to go. Now, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were in town, and warm weather team coming up to a foot of snow, another 5 inches falling. That's an advantage of the Packers. The Packers ended up winning 21-0.
Yeah, you would think so. Tampa Bay was way out of their element. No pun intended.
Between plays, ground crews had to go with shovels and brooms to push the snow off the yard lines so the officials could see the markings on the field, so they knew who was out of bounds, whether or not they scored a touchdown or not, because they couldn't see the field, and it was snowing so hard that the field would cover up so fast, and you literally had no idea where you were on the field. Broadcasters up at the press box had problems seeing the field of play. They could barely call the game. And I know both of us have experience calling games, and it's hard enough sometimes just recognizing who has the ball when it's clear. If you can't even see the numbers on them, I mean, that's tough. So, I mean, for that many fans not to show up to a game, and for any team, that's significant. And we're talking, you know, 17, 18 inches of snow.
Yeah, I mean, even for Green Bay, that's a lot. And I'm glad you touched on that, Matt, as I'm transitioning to another event. Visibility is very important for the players, for the people watching, and for the people announcing. The game I have to my back, I'll move so you guys can see it.
This I'll clear out of the snowball pick of the stands,
too. So there's the snowball, and here's the next event we're going to talk about. This is just a friendly between the USA and the
Dave, that just looks like a white background.
Yeah, it's the Slovenian national team played in Slovenia. That's actually fog, and I believe this was in the second half sometime. But as a person who watched that game just for a rematch of the whole World Cup matchup between the U.S. and Slovenia, I was amazed at the amount of fog that was here. And literally through almost the entirety of the second half, you couldn't see anything. All you could see watching that game was the scoreboard, like right about here, maybe a body or two somewhere. You didn't know what team they were on. And what made it worse was the Slovenians wore white with a little bit of green on it. So they were just totally invisible.
Talk about camouflage.
And the thing was, the U.S. actually won this game. So it was in 2011, we won 3-2. So it was just a remarkable play by just everybody on the U.S. team.
You know, we kind of downplay fog. Everyone talks about the snow games that you went to.
Oh, yeah.
Or the rain, or how horrible the conditions. Well, fog, I mean, it might not be that uncomfortable to sit in or to play, but if you can't see,
Yeah.
there's a problem.
Then why even go to the game if you can't see?
I know the Chicago Bears had their fog bowl where they had problems very similar to this game here. So, I mean, that's just a lot. I can only imagine. Like, even being from a player's perspective, how can you see the ball?
Yeah.
The goalies, I mean.
I'm pretty sure the ball was white as well. So just everything just started to blend in at one point. And, I think the U.S. was happy to get out of there with a win. And we have a couple of other scenarios where teams were actually relocated for a significant period of time because of the weather. Most notably, in 2005, because of Hurricane Katrina, the Saints were relocated from the Superdome, which was being used as a shelter at that time, to the Alamo Bowl
it's really
in
weird
Texas.
talking about the Saints football home games being affected by weather because they're in a dome.
Yeah, exactly. And it's weird to talk about it like that, but because of that, they were relocated to Texas, and they didn't play many home games, and even if they did, they were at the Alamo Bowl, I believe, in Texas. So a big weather event could really, and that was for the entire season. It affected the entire season. You have a story much like that as well.
Yeah, teams can get relocated, and it happens a lot more in baseball where you play every day if there's a rain delay or something. Usually those games are just made up in the end. But sometimes there's such a big weather event that teams have to be completely relocated, and that happened several years back where the Cleveland Indians had a home series early in the season in April, and there was an April snowstorm. And the Indians game was completely snowed out. They weren't going to play baseball in those conditions. So they took the game to Milwaukee. Now, why Milwaukee? That's also a cold climate.
Exactly.
Well, this was right after Miller Park was built in a retractable roof stadium, controlled climate, and it was pretty much the closest controlled climate stadium to Cleveland.
I see.
So they were able to go not further than they wanted to, but it guaranteed that that series would be played. So they played a series in Milwaukee, and another hurricane that affected the Houston area, I believe it was Ike, but don't quote me on that, forced the Astros to relocate. And if you're a Cubs fan, you probably remember these games. Played at Miller Park again in Milwaukee. They moved it north out of that. Obviously, Miller Park really close to Chicago, so all those tickets that were sold just pretty much as general admission were all Cubs fans. Well, that's Carlos Zambrano's no-hitter game. So a neutral site no-hitter happened with the visiting team pitcher with most of their fans in the stadium.
That's a lot of things to take in at once. Wow.
Yeah, so really take a couple seconds to think about that.
Visiting team at a neutral site throws a no-hitter.
With front of all their fans because they're closer. I mean, so that just happens all the time. And I know, like you said last time, we went all through the records with Sean and me, and I'm amazed every time. Even, you know, we talk about all these record games, but every single game that's played, football, baseball, that wind direction, the temperature, that can all affect. And they've tried to do studies on this, doing research for today. I've looked at it, and someone had a really good site. They had all this stats of percentage of fly balls with the wind going out or in or neutral. And the results were pretty much inconclusive, but conclusive enough in the way that there's so much variation in how a batter hits the ball that statistically you can't really notice that much. However, we do know it affects it. And if you can get a hold of the ball the exact same way as a hitter or as a kicker for field goals every single time, the stats would be stunning. Like we said, 40 feet for a hit baseball, you know, a couple inches on a curveball with different pressure. We're talking a temperature difference from cold season to warm season having a 20-foot effect. And I don't think we touch on this as much, the humidity factor. Also, if it's more humid, you can get 5 to 10 feet more out of it, especially if the humidity comes with the hot temperature. You can get 10 to 15 feet.
Yes.
That adds some wind. Suddenly, if the perfect case scenario happens, you can have a 350-foot flyout become a 410-foot home run pretty easily. So, I mean, just it's amazing at how much the weather can affect even the little day things to all the extremes that causes relocations of teams.
It could be the difference between your team winning the championship and going home in second place. I mean, what would happen if, I believe it was Carlton Fisk, if it had gone foul in the one that he seemingly directed with his hand? What if that had gone a little bit more, well, I guess it wasn't fair anymore, it would be foul because of the wind. It's very interesting to think about.
Quick aside from the game we touched at last time we did the sports episode, it was an AFC championship game in Cincinnati, the second coldest game on record to the Ice Bowl at Lambeau. It was at Cincinnati. And that game was so cold, and I believe they were playing a warm weather team and I don't remember exactly what it was. It might have been the Dolphins or something. But whatever it was, that team played the week before in like 90-degree humid home game and went up to a -9 in Cincinnati with a -30 wind chill. And they were heavily favored.
Chilly.
They were heavily favored over the Bengals, or it was a playoff game, but the Bengals won because they didn't feel real good in the weather, but it was much better than the 100-degree difference between the heat index and the wind chill in 1 week that the other team had to experience. And that's something that even the better team can't overcome in most situations.
Definitely, Matt, and it really can be the difference between you as a fan going home happy and you wondering what if the weather hadn't changed the outcome of the game. Well, that'll do it for this cold front. Make sure you like us on Facebook, VUTV Weather, and we'll be posting all of our episodes of the cold front on our YouTube channel for VUTV. I'm Dave Caulfield.
I'm Matthew Schaefer. Thanks for watching the cold front on VUTV.